disclosure of chemicals and the specifics of those chemicals, the specific amounts, the specific compositions and formulations of those chemicals, not just kind of the generic name. And also, does the public have access to that information, or is it only being sent to regulators and that's considered disclosure? A lot of regulations that we've seen in the United States, for example, talk about chemical disclosure, but there's almost always a section in those regulations that say that there are exemptions for trade secret chemicals. And you see the list of those chemicals, and then at the bottom there's a bunch blacked out and given permission not to disclose those because they're proprietary to that specific company. So we have no idea if that would happen here or not. And the concerns around that revolve around if there is an incident, if there is water issues, if there are air issues, not to know specifically what goes in on a well-by-well basis and the specifics of those really makes it next to impossible to create any correlations between the activity and what's happened. And then it's left to a court case, basically. And then we find a lot of people don't have pre-baseline water samples, or surprisingly they've never tested their water for any fracking chemicals or methane gas. And so there's actually no way to prove that there is any correlation between that activity and the incident. And we're seeing that a lot now in the United States. So toxic wastewater is another huge issue. With the 4 million liters of water that is used for the fracturing process, a lot of that, and some would say all of that, comes back over the course of the entire lifetime of the well, and so that needs to be handled, stored, transported, whatever needs to be done. And so there's issues around, do we have the facilities available to handle that wastewater? Do we know what's in there to be able to treat it to a level where it's safe to return to the environment? Is it going to an industrial wastewater facility? And if it is, what's the level of, do they know what to treat in that water to make sure that it's been treated properly? In Arkansas, for example, a lot of the produced water or the wastewater is injected into deep well injection sites. And those are basically more wells that are drilled in order to dispose of that waste. And so it's pumped down in there, hoped to never return again. And in Arkansas, those wells are now being linked to increased seismic activity in those areas. So some of those wells have been stopped, and they've placed a moratorium on new wells, new injection wells, and they're doing studies to try and link the seismic activity to the wastewater injection wells. Drinking water. So drinking water contamination, or the risk to drinking water contamination, is the single most talked about phone call, email that we get. Is my water going to be contaminated if this goes through? And of course, there's never any guarantees on anything. And just because there's gas drilling doesn't mean there's going to be water contamination, but it's a huge risk. And it's something that we're seeing as pervasive all across the United States, where gas drilling is very intensive. And from my perspective, it doesn't matter if it's from the fracking process or that very defined definition of fracking, which is the pressurizing of the well and the fracking of the geology, or it's related to anything from A to Z. It's all part of the process of gas drilling, gas exploration, drilling, production. It's all part of it. And so, a lot of times we hear that there's never been a single case of water contamination linked to hydraulic fracturing. And if you take that word for word, it's true. There's never been a proven case in court linking hydraulic fracturing to well water contamination. But we do know that there are people coming forward all across the United States with problems to their water, whether it's methane migration from deep, from the shale plays, or it's methane migration from a more shallow area, or it's a well bore construction issue, a weakness, or a crack. It's all part of the process, and the public associates the entire process as fracking. So there's a disconnect between the industry definition of fracking and the general public definition of fracking. And from our perspective, it doesn't really matter. It's all part of the process, and we are seeing water contamination. I think the last number I heard was around 2,000 reported cases in the United States of water contamination around drilling sites, and those are reported. So obviously, we would expect that a lot of people wouldn't report or couldn't report or were scared to report or whatever, they haven't reported. So this is a lady that I met in Arkansas, and she's had well water issues on her property. She's had water issues on her property and is trying to link that to well drilling activity close to her. So she's had numerous incidents where she's turned on her bathtub and black sludge has come through her faucets. And then the famous lighting, the famous party stripe where you get to light your tap water on fire. So there's a question of methane migration into well bores. And I don't know if anybody here heard just 2 weeks ago, a new study was released saying that indeed there is an increase in methane migration into well water bores around drilling operations. I think it's 1 kilometer around gas wells where people are seeing it 17 times or 17% increase in methane levels within that distance. And it's actually been linked to the depth, the shale layer. So it's not methane that's being introduced into the wellbore at higher levels. It's actually being produced from the shale layer. So it's finding its way up through the well into the water system. Then I just wanted to mention surface water contamination as purely a risk with the transporting of things back and forth on our highway systems. The amount of trucks that come in and leave either with chemicals or wastewater represents a huge opportunity for risks to accidents and spills and potentially contamination of surface water sources, which is the other source of drinking water for New Brunswickers, like the Turtle Creek watershed in Moncton or others. One of the other things that we don't talk a lot about is human health, primarily through air emissions. We do talk about water a lot because it's the thing that grabs us the most, most easily. It's so vital to us, but of course we also need to breathe. So we should be concerned about human health impacts from air emissions from the drilling and fracking processes. And so there's a lot of infrastructure associated, as I mentioned, and all that infrastructure needs to maintain certain pressures along the way to keep that gas flowing. And so there's a lot of venting systems incorporated into that system in order to make sure to regulate those pressures. And so with each vent of methane gas released into the air is highly toxic and also contributes to climate change much faster than carbon. So this is an infrared image that was taken over top of condenser tanks, and this is what you would see not